Okay, how you remember your first rehearsal with the Purple? First rehearsals when you meet together for the first time. I think I know that you known before the Richie Blackmore and all the rest, but when you all gathered together for the first time in the rehearsal room and started rehearsing songs or some covers, I don't know how it looks like.
Well, it initially started, there was only four of us to start with because we didn't have a singer.
Yeah.
So it was myself, Richie Blackmore, and Bobby Woodman, and John Lord, of course. And we just kind of mess around, busking stuff, instrumentals, and Bobby would sort of turn up sometimes and do the most amazing drum solo you ever heard, and we'd all sort of stare at him and think, this is incredible. And then, of course, we had to have the auditions for the singers, which was a bit of a nightmare. We put an advert in the Melody Maker, and I think the whole world turned up. And we tried to stagger it so that so many people would come on certain hours, but everybody turned up early, and it just it was absolute insanity. But anyway, in the end, we got there, and as you know, Bobby Woodman didn't work out, and he had to go. And as we'd already got Rod Evans in, he suggested his drummer, who Richard, he'd seen their band, The Maze, and he said, yeah, I know he's a good guy. And they snuck him in. I didn't know anything about it, but they snuck him in because I was very close with Bobby Woodman. They snuck in Ian Pace on his drum kit when he was out buying cigarettes to show what he was capable of. And that was it. And then it was just a matter of what have we got, really. Richie was kicking around a song that it was a tune he'd learnt with Screaming Lord Sutch. He'd had to learn it because the guitarist who wrote it was there before. And so Richie sort of got that together. I'm trying to think what it was now. God, dear. I can't think which tune it was. Anyways, it was all a long time ago. And he'd got a few chords and things together. And we all sat down one night and said we need to write a song. And it wasn't much of a song. It was called Shadows. That was the first thing we wrote together. And we just sat down for about an hour. And I came up with a bass riff, and I like to do things in fourths, so I started doing that, which eventually became the signature sound of Purple, really. I kicked that riff off, and then we got it together because the management, in their wisdom, had booked a recording studio. And of course, we didn't have anything really to record, so we went in and we made a demo, which was one called Love Help Me, which didn't have any vocals on it, and the other one was Shadows. And it weren't too bad. We'd only sort of been together for a matter of days, so it didn't work out too bad.
Do you remember what covers, about covers anyway, because you played the Beatles, Ike and Tina Turner, Cream, Hendrix, of course Hendrix popularized the Hey Joe, but it's not his song anyway. But who decided about these cover songs? I mean, I think management pushed to some covers here for recording, but who?
Well, we were a new band. We'd only been together a matter of days, and we decided we wanted to be different. We weren't quite sure how different. John and myself had seen Vanilla Fudge, and we thought they are so different. We want to be as different as them. We want to be. We can't. They inspired us initially. Vanilla Fudge, just the whole style they played, their attack, the panache. They were just larger than life. It was amazing. So we always had that in mind, and John started putting some classical bits together as intros and outros, to help everything along. And we thought, we're not sure whether we're going to go down very well playing this kind of thing. We started to get a few tunes together that sounded reasonable. So we said, where could we play it that nobody knows us, We could see how it goes down. And John Lord and I had both done tours of Denmark where we were sort of reasonably well known. So we got in touch with the Danish promoter, said, look, we got a new band. We're not sure whether people are going to like it. Can we come over and do a tour? And he got us a tour together very quickly, but we only had a couple of songs. So it was a case of saying, well, what numbers do we want to do? So I think it was Richie who came up with the idea of doing Paint It Black instrumentally, and that was our drum solo. So we played Paint It Black, and then Ian would do a drum solo. Richie liked a John Mayall number called My Little Girl, and I thought, yeah, that rocks along a little bit. So we got that together. And then Richie and I both heard Hush. We didn't know who'd recorded it or anything like that, but we liked it. And we were always together when we heard it. And I said, I quite like that song, whatever it is, Hush. And Richie said, yeah. So we called up a friend of ours who played in what they called a palais band, played in a ballroom every night in London. And I said, do you do a song called Hush in your repertoire? And he said, yes, I do. And I said, would you come up to our house and teach it to us? So he did. And it worked out for the best because we'd never really heard the records that had been made of it. I know there were a couple of versions of it. And he showed us on his guitar what to do. And I said, well, how does the bass go? And he said, oh, dun, 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 dun. I said, yeah, like this. Yeah, that's it. And we kind of got it together and it became part of our stage act. So we went off to Denmark, and I suppose we had about 8 or 9 songs. We did Back at the Chicken Shack, and stuff like that, big keyboard numbers. And it went down amazingly well. We couldn't believe it. People loved us. And we thought, yeah, we're away. So as soon as we got back from Denmark, the manager said, well, you're in the recording studio. So, of course, we said, well, what do you mean we're in a recording studio? Yeah, we're going to make the first album. So what the hell are we going to do? He said, well, do what you did in Denmark. So that's really how it came about. We didn't have many songs, but whatever we'd been doing live, it was a given that we had to do this, for our first album. And so that's what happened. And Hush, of course, as soon as we put the bass and drum track down, I just knew. I said, that is a hit record. I just knew the feel of it was so good.
I would like to ask about Carlo Little. He was a great drummer, and you cooperate with him for a long time. And he also was the first drummer of the Rolling Stones, yeah?
Well, not quite. Yeah, 39 years I worked with Carlo. 39 years. He was amazing. And of course, when I was starting, he was one of my heroes. When I was still at school, I used to go and hear Screaming Lord Sutch and the Savages, and nobody had heard anything like Screaming Lord Sutch's band, and the power and the noise. And I think most of it was the fact that Carlo Little just played permanent 8s on the bass drum, It was such a big noise. And everybody idolized Carlo. And anyway, the band split from Screaming Lord Sutch, and they teamed up with a guy called Cyril Davis, who was a real out-and-out blues man. And the embryonic Rolling Stones, I think they had different members would come and go, really, but they were still feeling their way. But they would all go and watch Cyril Davis. And so apparently the story goes, I think it's true, that Mick Jagger and Brian Jones, who were more or less leading the Stones at the time, they went round to Carlo's house and they said they wanted him and Ricky Brown, who was the bass player, to join us. And Carlo just said, well, he wasn't very impressed. They'd been the interval group with Cyril Davis. They used to play half an hour. In those days, the main band would play all night and the support band would just do a little spot in the middle. Anyway, Carlo said, well, how much are you going to pay me? And so Mick Jagger just said, well, We got a couple of gigs coming up, and we might get a couple of pounds each. He said, well, Cyril pays me like £5 or £6 a night, and we're working all the time. So, well, would you help us out? So he did a couple of shows with them, and he said, well, it's a long time ago, but he said they were absolutely awful. He said they were really terrible, and he wasn't impressed at all. And Ricky Brown wasn't interested. He went on to join Georgie Fame later on. Yeah. So anyway, it was after Johnny Kidd died. I didn't really feel like playing anymore. I thought I was going to retire from playing, and I couldn't work for a while because I had some injuries. And one day I got a call from Carlo Little, and I thought, wow, Carlo Little, he's calling me up, the big star Carlo. I was so impressed. And he said, we need a bass player. And I said, who's it for? He said, I'm going on the road with Billy Davis, who was quite a well-known singer at the time. She'd had a #1 record, and she was at the time living with Jet Harris from the Shadows. So they were like, so what would you say, like Victoria Beckham and they were like the Beckhams, always chased by the press. And so I said, no, Carlo. I said, I don't think I'm going to play anymore. Before the accident, I would have run over broken glass to play with Carlo Little. It would have been amazing. But I was a bit depressed, and I said, no, I'm not going to do it, Carlo. And, okay, so he phoned me up again about a week later, and he said, we got a tour lined up. He said, we got weeks in clubs all up the north of England, be good money. I said, no, I can't do it. Anyway, about a week after that, he phoned up and he said, we have to, this was I think on a Friday night. He said, we have to, no, it was about a Wednesday night. He said, we have to open on a Saturday night in Bradford, and we still haven't got a bass player. Will you just help us out? So I said, well, if you put it like that, yeah, I'll help you out. And that was it. I was back in the business and went on the road with Billy and with Carlo, and we just became a team. And when the work got very thin with Billy, as it happened, she had a lot of work cancelled. So we said, right, we'll go off with Screaming Lord Sutch. So we went to Screaming Lord Sutch for a while. And then we got a call from Spencer Davis, who started a management company, and said, we got this big hit record called the Flower Pot Men, and we haven't got a band. You guys want to be it, So we said, yeah. So it's basically Billy Davis's band went off as the Flower Pot Men then. But Carlo was an amazing drummer. I mean, he was fabulous. He wasn't a technician like Mac Paul or somebody like that, but he had a style that just excited people. And everybody, if you look at the old films of Cyril Davis, you'll see in the crowd there'll be all these people like Jeff Beck will be there watching, and Eric Clapton, they're all there, Jimmy Page. You could pick these people out in the audience all watching Cyril because his band was so good. Of course, he had Nicky Hopkins on piano, who was legendary, and an amazing guitarist called Bernie Watson. And Bernie Watson just disappeared and nobody knew what happened to him. But he was one of the first guitar superstars. He was so good. And people would go there to watch Bernie Watson. And he got in the habit of when he played a guitar solo, he turned his back on the audience. And of course, all the guitarists would be trying to see what he did. Yeah. So, so I stayed with Carlo for years. And then I went off with Purple. Carlo wasn't involved with that, but we still kept in touch. And after that, when I had Warhorse, we were good friends. So we stayed together. And we did odd sessions with people, and we had jam nights and things like that. Always wherever Carlo was playing, if I could be there with him, I'd go. Just to be able to play with him. up until the end of his life. It was like that.
Mhm.
And then in 1979, he started a new band up, which eventually became the Good Old Boys, my own band. But he started it, and once again, he didn't have a bass player, and I didn't want to do it because I was too busy doing other stuff. And he said, "Oh, just come and help us out." And we had such a laugh; it was such a riot. I thought, "Yeah, I want to do this all the time." It was just pure fun. So we just pick songs we want to do. There's nothing to do with managements or agents or record companies. Just go out and play for fun, pure fun, and that's what it was. Yeah, Carlo was the best. He was the greatest. We made I had a few other recordings with Carlo. You know, we were always a pair for all our lives, really. Well, for 39 years, and he died sadly. And just before he died, there was a lot of interest in the old Cyril Davis band. So he got Ricky Brown back on bass, and he got Ronnie Wood to help him out, and his brother Art Wood, who'd been around on the blues circuit in those days. And Carlo did his own album, and it really was good. And I didn't play on it because he wanted Ricky Brown because he'd been in the original band with Cyril Davis. But yeah, we did lots of stuff.
Are there any recorded songs existing that haven't been released yet? Because I know that you've been together in a short period of time, and you record company pushed you to record quickly. I think the one album you have more time, but are there any outtakes still existing that haven't been released yet?
Not for the first lineup. No, everything was done.
Everything was done, so nothing left.
I came up with a song. I can't even remember what it was called now. I think it was called Playground. And we had excess material, and it never ever got finished. And even that was put out. The backtrack didn't even have a vocal, but that was put out on the outtakes album. And we recorded it when we first went to America. We did a song called "Oh No No," which was well played, but it wasn't a great song. And I had the only acetate of that, and they came after me for that. And in the end, I sold them the acetate. Well, I didn't sell them the acetate. They paid me for the rights to record it on the outtakes album. And then the actual acetate itself, I sold that to a guy that reads the weather report in Sweden. He offered me a lot of money for it, and I thought, you know, I've got so much junk hanging around. What do I need it for? Collector's item, I guess. But no, there's nothing else. There's nothing else. Interesting point. The first album was completed. We each got a white label copy, and on that white label copy were 4 extra bars of keyboard. We had copyright problems, and we had to take that out on the finished product. So those white labels would be collectible to people, because that's the Mark I band with four extra bars that no one's ever heard before. I gave mine to Ashley Holt, the singer with Warhorse, so where he still got it. But they're probably quite, you know, worth a few quid. No, there's nothing else out there. I wish there was. You know, even the stuff we recorded for the BBC. I mean, I think that's all been re-recorded and put out. You know, so no, there's nothing left. Can't think of anything at all.
I also put a lot of ideas, as we talked last time. You said about Black Knight, about Summertime, this song of Ricky Nelson that you played to Richie, and he get it to later on. You found out that they recorded Black Knight. Yeah.
Well, that was kind of my tune-up piece, because I love Ricky Nelson. I had most of his records, and I always thought what a great riff that was, and it was so prominent on Ricky Nelson's record. So often I'd get to a rehearsal room and just make sure I'm in tune. I'll play that. And I think the first time Richie heard it, I actually plugged into Richie's fuzz box, because he had a great fuzz box that was built by a legendary guy called Peppy Rush, who used to make things like that before anybody else had them. And Richie had this amazing, looked like an old tin can, but it worked really well. And I said, let me try the bass through your fuzz box, Rich. So plugged it in, and I went straight down. And Richie went, what is that? I said, what is what? He said, that riff. I said, oh, that's off a Ricky Nelson number. I said, I've been playing that for years. He said, we could use that. I said, well, I don't think so. I said, it's so well known, everybody knows it, and everybody knows who wrote it as well. So he said, well, we can use that. And of course, he filed that away in his brain for later on. And I couldn't believe it when I heard Black Knight, because I thought, basically, you got a pretty rubbish song with a pretty rubbish backing, very simple, offbeat type backing, but the riff is what sold the song. And good luck to them. They go away. I always felt Richie should have said thanks for that.
Yeah, he should, for sure. You also play concerts with the band that is called It's a Beautiful Day.
Yeah.
You play, I think, few concerts with them in '69, as far as I know. And they have this song Bombay Calling, and I think later on it's become Child in Time, so as far as I know, you also on rehearsal you played that song,
The very last rehearsal I think I had, and John Lord said, we're going to do Bombay Calling. I said, we can't do that, John. You can't do that. And it was a case of, well, watch us, and they did. I was never happy about that. I know that all bands kind of borrow stuff. You're always influenced by other people, and you can't help but take stuff. But I think to blatantly take that great little riff they got there, I don't think that was right. But that's what they did. There you go. Happened all the time. That's the way it is. Yeah, they were a nice band, Bombay Calling. Yeah, I was very friendly with a couple of them when they came to England. I met up with them, and I don't think they were too thrilled about that. There you go. Rock and roll.
John Entwistle, you've known him very well, and he was your colleague, friend also, and he convinced you to create new band, so then it became Warhorse, but it comes somehow from John Entwistle from The Who,
Well, John didn't live far from me, and there was a famous music pub in a town called Brentford, which has got a good football team, by the way, and this place was called the Red Lion. And we used to hang out there, and like rock and roll guys would play in one bar and the country and western guys would play in another. And a lot of my friends would be down there, like Mickey Underwood, James Royal singing, and Albert Lee. I used to see these people. And anyway, John was always down there as well. So what we used to do, we used to go there on a Tuesday night. It was regular to kind of meet up with all his old musos, and then whoever was up for it when the pub shut, we would go up to the West End to a club called the Speakeasy, which was like a musicians club, or another one called the Cromwellian Club, which was very good, where the Beatles used to hang out. And we used to go to these clubs. But I was working for Marsha Hunt then, and Marsha Hunt was with Track Records, which was the Who's company. So I would often be in the office, or go up to get the wages and stuff like that. And I'd always see Keith Moon, and who I knew well anyway, Keith Moon and Entwistle. I was never friendly with the other two at the Who. It was always Moon and Entwistle. They were always together, and they always used to be in Jim Marshall's shop, his first shop, and that's where I used to see these guys. anyway, he used to say, "Oh, how's it going with Marsha and all that?" I said, "Yeah, it's okay," but I was kind of a bit in limbo because I'd gone back from being a band member to being just a sideman, just a hired musician. And so I thought, well, this isn't the future really for me. I need another band. And I was talking to John about it one night. I said, I can't do this forever with Marsha. And he said, well, you know what you got to do. He looked at me and said, you know what you got to do. He looks over his whiskey. I said, what's that, John? He said, get a new band together and bloody knock them all out, he said, And I thought, yeah, why? Of course, that's what I got to do. And being as how we were at the Red Lion, I went straight away. Albert Lee was playing in there, and I had a chat with Albert, and I said, do you feel up to doing something like this? And he said, well, it sounds interesting. He said, but I can't play that style like Richie can. I said, yeah. I said, because Albert was Richie idolised Albert, he absolutely idolised him. I said, oh, Richie thinks you're the greatest. I said, so do I, Anyway, I think he already had offers in the pipeline, so they didn't come off. And then I got in touch with Mickey Underwood. As it happened, he was interested, but he was just starting Quatermass. Then we spoke to Pete Robinson, who was also going to start Quatermass. So none of these guys sort of were available for me. So I thought, well, what can I do? I've got to get guys that are this good, but are totally unknown. And anyway, I did a session, BBC session with James Royal, and the keyboard player was Rick Wakeman, who I'd met once before. Now, he played in the same band as the guy that taught us Hush in this ballroom every night. It was called the Ronnie Smith Band, and Rick Wakeman was the keyboard player, called himself Richie Wakeman in those days. And anyway, we did the session with James Royal, and he said, what are you going to do with yourself? I said, well, I'm playing with Marsha at the moment. I'm not sure. And he said, if you ever formed a new band, he said, I'd be honoured to be in it. I said, well, it's very nice of you to say that, Rick. I will bear that in mind, So first thing I thought, Rick Wakeman, he's a nice player. He jumped at it. Yeah, great. So he said, well, what about Ashley, the singer with the Palais Band? I said, yeah, Ashley. I said, I remember he auditioned for Deep Purple. He had an amazing voice, but he was singing soul stuff. So that's why we weren't interested in him. But he was an amazing singer. I mean, he when it comes to screaming, he makes Gillan look like a beginner, And so anyway, so I thought, yeah, I wonder, he said he'd be interested. And then I thought about Jed Peck, who I'd worked with for years on and off. I knew he was a manic guitarist, and he was working with Marsha. So I thought, well, this guy, he's just as good as Richie Blackmore. Why don't I use him? You tend to forget people that you're so close to. They're just as good as anybody. So Jed Peck came on board. And then I had the singer and the drummer in the group called the Sweets used to regularly come round and visit me. We were good friends because they once supported Deep Purple and they were mega fans of ours. And they hadn't had any hit records themselves yet. They were still struggling. And one day, the drummer, Mick Tucker, came round on his own, and my wife made him some breakfast, and I thought, yeah, Mick, he's a lovely drummer. And I said, do you fancy joining my new band, Mick? And he said, I'm not good enough to play with you, he said. I said, don't be silly, of course you are. You're good enough to play with anybody. No, he said, the guy you want is a guy called Mac Paul. I said, Mac Paul? So I've never heard of him. He said, this guy is the best you'll ever get. He said, he's the guy that turned down Led Zeppelin. I said, oh, yeah, sounds interesting. I said, how do we get hold of him? I said, no mobile phones in those days. I said, have you got his address? No, only that he lives somewhere in Birmingham. But Birmingham's a big place. So when I told Jed Peck about it, he said, I'm going to track this guy down. And he did. He just asked questions, went round, he phoned everybody he knew. Do you know a guy called Mac Paul? Yeah. So we finally found an address for him, and I dropped him a little note. He came straight back on the phone, and Jed and I got in our motors with the equipment, went up to Birmingham, and he'd hired a little church hall, and the three of us sat up there. Never heard anything like it in my life, you know. And he had a double bass drum kit, and he was just phenomenal, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And when he went off to the toilet, Jed Peck said to me, "Are we good enough to play with this guy?" You know, I said, "Well, maybe not, but let's see what he says." You know, and Max said, "Yeah, I love it. You know, yeah, I want to be in the band." Then a few weeks later, the drum stall became vacant with Marsha Hunt. So of course, Matt came down to London, got a flat, and he joined Marsha. So then all we had to do was to okay the singer. So we went up to the Palais where they all worked, and Matt was a bit skeptical about him. You know, he said, yeah, they all say he's great. Let's see how great he is, you know. And anyway, they announced this song called He Ain't Heavy, He's My Brother, which was a massive hit record for a group called the Hollies, which was quite a tough one to sing. And Max said, yeah, let's see if he can sing this one. And of course, Ashley sung it so well. Max said, yeah, that guy's got the tubes, you know, he's the man. So that was the lineup of the band. And then, unfortunately, Rick Wakeman, he got a bit, not difficult to deal with, but he was never available. He lived in Reading, which was quite a way out of London, where his gig was every night. He had a girlfriend there, so he was rarely home. And the initial idea was to rehearse at Rick Wakeman's parents' house, which wasn't far from me. And we'd get there, and Rick didn't show up. So Rick's mum would be making us cups of tea, and we'd all be waiting, where's Rick? You know. And in the end, it got a bit difficult. And then finally, we had a meeting with a guy, an Australian guy we met up with, who wanted to invest some money in the band. He was a bit of an impresario from Australia, and we thought this might be a good opportunity. So we arranged a meeting with this guy in his hotel, and Rick, true to form, didn't show up. And the guy just said, well, you know, if your keyboard wizard can't be bothered to turn up to meet me, then forget it, you know. And of course, I was so annoyed. So I said to Rick, forget it, you know, that's it. And Rick said, oh, you know, he still made out he wanted to be part of it. And but we just sort of carried on without a keyboard player. And then Matt Paul said, well, I got a friend called Frank Wilson, who's absolutely amazing. But Frank had already teamed up with a new band called The Rumble, and they were making an album. He said, but I'll play on your demos for you. I'll help out on a session basis. So we did. We booked a studio to do the first demos. And halfway through, Frank said, you know, I want to be with you guys. That's it. So, and I'm glad he did, because in my book, he took keyboard playing to a new level. You know, it's just phenomenal. The best I'd ever worked. I've worked with some amazing keyboard players, but he still surprises me.
Yeah. But what's the status now for Warhorse? Because you released this live album lately, yeah, the live album from the Reform.
Week, yeah.
Yeah.
It came out last week in Japan for the Asian market. I did a lovely job with a little gatefold thing, yeah, really nice. I can't really read what's on it because it's in Japanese, but it looks beautiful. And BGO have put it out last week. They released it in Europe, and also it's available in America through BGO. And both companies have done lovely jobs, so we're very pleased, because we never thought this would ever see the light of day. We've been talking about this album for, well, ever since we made it, and it was it was sad it never came together, because Warhorse broke up in '74, and ever since then everybody did different things. You know, Frank went off in Russ Ballard's band, Ashley went off with Rick Wakeman. We all did different things, and but whenever we got together, we all agreed we should never have broken up Warhorse. We could have been on the verge of really making it, you know. And anyway, so it was Pete Parks that said at the turn of the century, you know, at the millennium, he said, why don't we get together while we're all still alive and just do a one-off gig just for a laugh, you know, just for the crack. So we all said, yeah, that's great, let's do it. So Mac Paul was working every night with different people. He was all over the country. So it was very difficult to nail him down for rehearsals. I think we had about 2 rehearsals. And when you haven't played together for 26 years, you do tend to forget things. Anyway, Ashley Holt says, why don't we have a little run through first? He said, we'll get a little pub where there'll only be 2 men and a dog in there. Nobody will know who we are, and we'll run through and see what it's like. Okay, so we went there. He found this little pub. Anyway, the word got out. When we got there, about 300 people in there, and it was only a tiny little place. And we were terrible. I mean, we just played terribly, but the crowd loved it, and it boosted our confidence for the following night, which was the proper venue. And so we did the gig. It was packed out. It went down great, and we recorded it. And there was a load of interest in Warhorse after that. People were saying, oh, you should all get back together again. You should reform. We got calls from agents. A guy called us from South Africa and wanted us to tour. And we all got very excited about it all. And then, sadly, Mac Paul was diagnosed with a serious illness, throat cancer. And so we just abandoned the whole idea. And happily, Mac carried on for another 12 or so years, you know, still playing his drums. So he fought it off pretty good. But, you know, we lost the impetus and that was it. The problem was we had a record company that wanted to put the album out, the live album, but the guy that recorded it wouldn't let us have the tapes. And we tried everything. I don't know what his problem was. And our record guy said, you know, let us speak to him. And what is it you want? How much money do you want? Well, they couldn't get any sense out of this guy. And we all just gave up the idea. And occasionally I used to listen to it because I had a very rough, he'd given me a rough demo of it that before he'd mixed it. And I used to listen to that and think, yeah, this album was good. It should have come out, you know. Got mistakes in it, but, you know, that's how it is. So anyway, one day I get an email from this guy's wife, said he's died, the guy that recorded us. She said, I found these tapes with Warhorse written on them. Shall I dispose of them or do you want them? I said, yeah, no, I want them, yeah. So they run a format called ADAT, I think it's called, a great big as an old VHS recording, you know. So, of course, we had to get those put into files and then the files had to be remixed and everything. But, yeah, in the end, it all came out pretty good.
Yeah.
You know, it's not the best album in the world, but, you know, it was a lot of fun and people seem to like it. So,
yeah, I mean, I listened to it a few times and, you know, the energy is still there. All this hard rocking, I can say that you're in the good mood, everyone in the stage, and the audience also get it. And it was
yeah. The only downside was when he recorded us, he didn't put a mic on the crowd, so you could hardly hear the audience, but they were there, and it was a terrific night. It really was a good night. So that's everything from Warhorse has now been released. Cherry Red have put out a double CD last year, which seems to be doing quite well. You know, seems to be selling quite well, and that's got just about everything on it. But there's some terrible bootlegs out there. Some are good. I mean, I've seen bootlegs which are copies of the Vertigo albums, and they're absolutely amazing. You think, oh God, how these people got it perfect? But there's another terrible one that says on it, made in the USA, and it's called Dollhouse, and it's absolutely dreadful. It's got a paper sleeve on it, which has got a photo of the original band. Most of the tracks on it are the latest lineup. So 2 of the guys on the photo weren't even on the recordings. They don't know that. and the actual way the thing has been cut is very dull. When you can play it on the best hi-fi machine and it still sounds pretty miserable. So I'm not happy about that, but collectors are buying it because it's there, I guess. But it's the same with Purple, you know. It's I see a different bootleg nearly every week from Purple, and they're done so professionally and they look so good. You think, my God, they're doing a better job than the record companies did.
Sometimes the bootlegs, the now as the technology is so good and they can redo it, even if the original material is not so good quality, they can do some miracles on it.
I just wish they paid us for it.